Welcome to another episode of Space Together with Justin Knapp and our special guests, where you can learn how space sharing can enable you to generate a non-traditional income stream while making an impact.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us. I have the Bishop Jaime Englehart here with us today. This is something I'm really excited about. You guys have listened to us talk to all sorts of different people, but Bishop Jaime is really, really close to me. He's certainly a mentor to me, certainly a father to me in the faith. And I think I met you when I was 23 or 24, something pretty young. There was just an immediate connection, and I've gotten to meet, so many people all over the place that do a lot of really cool things. Jaime is truly one of my favorite people, or most favorite people on the earth. Trust him with everything that I have. So I'm excited for this conversation. I'm excited to talk with you. Jaime, thanks for being with us, man.
Thanks, man. And ditto back at you.
Yeah. And Bishop is, you travel around and you do really, I know you do itinerantly speak and you go and you talk in places and things, but much more than that, you are much more of like a consultant, father, apostolic leader, where you go in and just kind of help people in different sessions. But talk a little bit about what that is that you do.
Yeah. I tell people on airplanes all the time when they ask me what I do for a living, tell them I troubleshoot for nonprofit corporations. I don't like to tell people I'm a preacher, because then they stop cussing and they tighten up. They get real uncomfortable around you all of a sudden. And I'd rather just have a conversation with people. But for going on, this is, I think, going on the 19th year of me leading CIM, which is Connect International Ministries. And it's a group of churches, leaders, business people, people from all different walks of life that all kind of have come together for a specific purpose of, seeing the kingdom of God advanced on the earth, and mainly through relationships. And so a lot of my traveling, I tell pastors all the time, that I know I'm coming here to preach to your church, but that just allows me to really come spend time with you and your family. And that's the thing I really enjoy the most, is the building of relationships. And this is my 33rd year now traveling. And I am on the road at least 48 weekends out of the month, and about 20 to 24 full weeks. Yeah. And so, when I'm home this week, which is more of a rarity. So we're able to do this from my home office rather than a hotel room.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is all good. But of course, since the grandbabies have come along, it kind of tends to get me to want to stay home a little bit more. So I've switched to traveling up a little bit. But yeah, that's in a nutshell. Preaching, teaching, imparting, leadership. You name it at one time or another, we've done it.
Yeah, man. And I'm going to tell a few stories on you just because we know each other as well as we do. But, when I first met Jaime, it was this really weird thing. It was certainly kind of a supernatural thing. You can call it for whatever you want to call it. But I was actually hanging out with another mentor of mine. Really, really early on. I definitely wasn't married yet. I'd actually just started dating my wife, who I've been married to for 10 years now. So this has been a while back. And I was sitting down, just hanging out, telling this person, how I feel and what I thought my life was going to end up as. And obviously I was pretty wrong there, but I was sitting down and just telling, like, this is, my experience, this is who I am, and just having one of those mentor-mentee initial conversations. And she stops me and she just goes, Justin, I really have somebody that you want to meet. And if I stop there and backtrack, like 2 days prior to this, I had like one of the weirdest dreams of my life, where I was standing in this room that wasn't very big. It almost resembled more of like kind of a divey bar than it did anything else. And I was up and I was speaking. I was clearly preaching, like I was like preaching something. And it was the church had a smoking section. And that's what stood out the most in the dream. Is I woke up and I was like, what was that, man? And I was like, I was in this place, a church that had a smoking section. And so as I'm sitting there talking to this mentor, she says, man, you remind me so much of this guy I just met named Bishop Jaime Englehart. And he has 2 churches in 2 of the most dangerous cities in America. He has a smoking section in his church. And I was like, what did you just say? And she's like, yeah, he has a smoking section in his church. And I had just had that dream prior. So I knew, I was like, regardless of what this guy teaches, whatever he has going on, I'm definitely going to try to connect and see what's going on. I say all that just to say that I think that what you do better than the majority of people that have, connected to me, quote unquote, whatever, is that you were one of the first people that just came in and said, Justin, I see who you are and I just encourage it. So I'm not trying to change you. You didn't try to make me cut my hair or shave my face or change the way I was dressing or whatever. If anything, you wanted me to push more into the expression of who I really was. And that's something that's always really stood out to me. And when I was leaving ministry and going full-time business, you 100% encouraged that, as long as this is what the Lord's really saying. And I just kind of want to know, where did all of that come from in all of these years of, being in ministry and all these, just growing up? I mean, we didn't talk about your past, but aren't you like third generation preacher on both sides or something crazy? Or no, your dad was first generation on your mom's side. You were crazy far back.
Right.
So church all through your veins, you know what I mean? It's been your career. What was it about that caused you to say, when I get to be with people, when I get to be in a father, leadership, mentor position, I'm just going to encourage them to be who they are? Was there something behind that?
Yeah, I think it was all the years. I mean, I'm third generation classical Pentecostal. So it was very legalistic. I always tell people my mom has a PhD, which is a Pentecostal hairdo, still got the big hair. And for me, I think it was maybe, I rebelled from like about 11 or 12 up to like 19. I rebelled against them trying to make me to be like them.
Yeah.
And so, I know when I woke up in jail at 19 years old, was having my kind of reawakening to Christ. For me, it was like, you know what, I'm not gonna, first of all, be that. I'm gonna be the unique grace on my life, and I'm not gonna allow other people to conform me to their image. But if they want to help conform me to the image of Jesus, that's a whole nother ball game. But not to their religious idea. And so I think from the get-go, I've just never tried to make anybody be me, plus, when I first got into ministry, I was connected to a man that really felt it was, his favorite verse was follow me as I follow Christ, which meant be a clone of me. And I'm like the only guy connected to him that for some reason he didn't force that on. I think it's because he knew he couldn't, because I just wouldn't have tolerated it. And so I've just always had this mindset of, when Jesus was on the earth and how he led, Jesus gets a big crowd, feeds the five, which was probably more like 20 or 30,000 because they only counted the men. And he gets this big crowd. And then he says, now, if you really want to follow me, eat me. Pretty much preached a pretty intense sermon there. Drink my blood, eat my body. Everybody leaves, but he turns to the 12 and he says, are you going to go too? And what I love about that is he didn't say, you can't go anywhere. I've chosen you. You didn't choose me. You're my disciples. We're in covenant. You're my sons and daughters. That if God in the flesh led by always giving people choice with no control, man, when that became real to me, it was literally the first year I began to lead a group of churches. And that just really became a revelation to me. And I said, my job is not to get people to do things the way I do it, but help support in what God told them to do, or help people to become the best them they can be, not the best me that they can be, because that's ridiculous, but that's where control comes from, fear, manipulation, and it's systems, it's in churches, it's in business. I mean, that's just, it doesn't matter what gamut you function in. People like to be able to have control, and I just made up my mind. I mean, I can only control what I do, and be self-controlled. And sometimes I'm not even the best at that, because all of us deal with our stuff. It's not my job to control other people. It's there to lead, encourage, and strengthen other people. And I think in a nutshell, if I go back to the root, that's really where it was, because I hated being controlled. Because I was born to lead, not be ruled and controlled. And I had no problem submitting to authority, but it was authority that loved me and was leading me, and not pushing me or forcing me. And I think absolutely that's the key.
Man, absolutely. When I met you, you were pretty high flying, man. I mean, you were running all around. I remember one of the first times I talked with you, you would tell me about some of these churches that you would go to that would be really, really big. And you're like, dude, it's like being a celebrity. You pull up, you got somebody coming to the door to greet you. They're picking you up at the airport in this, Tahoe all decked out or whatever. And then they're taking you to your hotel. They're picking you up. They're taking you wherever you want to go to eat. You have all these people kind of surrounding you. Then you go to this green room, and then you walk out of the green room. You get out there, you do your thing. You pick up a $25,000-$50,000 check, and then you're out. And it's the same process on the way out. You know what I mean? And especially back when I was like 23 or 24, I couldn't fathom that. I couldn't even imagine that was a reality, and you were living that. And you told me that you kind of came, and this is a story I've told so many places, so I know you already know what I'm talking about, but You told me that you had this one experience. We'll save, the place and all the other kind of things to protect the innocent, but you basically had one encounter that kind of shifted away, and it was whenever somebody picked you up at an airport, and it was just a whole crazy experience. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. It was actually they actually picked me up at a hotel because I was about an hour from there ministering on Sunday, and then they were picking me up on Tuesday to do some ministry Wednesday and Thursday, and picked me up in his vehicle, and the man opens up the back door for me, and the front seat is pushed all the way forward and dropped down. And I look at him and I say, "Is it just the two of us in the car?" And he says, "Yeah." I said, "Well, how far of a drive is it?" He said, "Like an hour." And I'm like, "Well, I don't want to talk to the back of your head, and I'm going to sit in the front." He said, "Well, sir, I can't let you do that." And I said, "Well, I'm bigger than you. You're not going to stop me." And so I shut the door and I get in the front seat next to him, and we talked the whole hour drive. And on the way back to the airport a couple of days later, and I was asking him about his family and his kids and, his life. And during that little conversation, kind of the Holy Spirit whispered a little thing to me. I gave him a little kind of encouraging just a really small little prophetic word that was real profound for him. And then on the way back to the airport, he was like crying, like sitting next to me. And I was like, "What's going on?" He's like, "I've never met anybody like you." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well," he said, "after our church hit like 3 or 4,000 people," he said, "the who's who in the zoo have come here to preach."
Yeah.
And he said, "I've gotten bawled out for not bringing, certain sandwiches from this well-known city to them. They sit in the back. They never talk to me. They don't ask me anything about me and my family. Just you treat me pretty much like a peon." And he was one of the associate pastors of the church. And he said, "You're the first one that wanted to sit in the front and actually have a conversation with me." And he said, "I've never met anybody like you." And I said, "You mean a human?"
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just like, "What are you talking about?" I mean, that's
Yeah.
just called a human being, like
Yeah.
just human,
We're in a car for an hour. Let's talk,
yeah. I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean, that just doesn't even make any sense to me, but I understand what he meant because I've been in some of those circles, and I just made up my mind. That wasn't me. I was
Yeah.
never going to be like that. I wanted to treat, the person cleaning the church the same that I would treat the senior pastor, and look people in the eyes and realize that everybody has value. And I mean,
Yeah.
obviously it's ridiculous that Christians especially even think like that.
Yeah.
Let alone supposed, men or women of God. I mean,
Mhm.
which we should be some of the most humble, kind people, on the planet, because our job is to serve others, not to be served. So
Yeah.
somehow, we got that all mixed up.
Man, and that you told me that story really, really early on. And I think that was actually, when you told it to me, it was kind of fresh. It was like it wasn't that old. And,
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
time, I think you were in the, kind of like your mid to late 40s going into your 50s,
yeah,
and you told me then you were like, "I've just made a decision that I can go and I can do all this other stuff. I can go preach and get a $25,000 check. I can go and I could be a part of basically whatever I want to do at this point. But I've just decided that I'm going to go and I'm going to hang out with the people and I'm going to serve the folks that I know kind of need me or that I feel drawn to." And man, I can just say, man, I've been, obviously with you pretty much since that time, and can certainly say that I know every member of your family. Your son-in-law and daughter are some of my best friends in the world. We go on at least one vacation together every year.
yeah,
Love them to death. I think I called Esteban yesterday. I mean, so could not be closer. I know your wife, I
yeah,
know your kids, I know your grandkids, I know all the people connected to you. Jamie 100% means that he did walk away from kind of this pinnacle. I know certainly at my age when I was really young and I was a good speaker and I kind of had that, that whole movement. I mean, you remember Pulse and how the pure insanity that was our church. We had all this
yeah,
energy and all this stuff. And, at
yeah,
the time I'm thinking like, this is where I'm going. Like I'm going to learn from this guy and I'll be doing these big speaking engagements and traveling all the time and all this stuff. And then I meet you and you're just like, "Hey, dude, none of that's really worth it. It's not going to fulfill you. You'll
yeah,
you'll make a little bit more money, but you could do that in a lot of other ways where you're not going to be disappointed." And man, so I just really say that to say that I don't know that I've met too many other leaders that I can just 100% come out and say that if Jamie is working with you, there's not an ulterior motive. There
yeah,
there is nothing else other than he
yeah,
genuinely feels some sort of call in connection to you. He genuinely wants the best for you. And so I know I'm just heaping praise and kudos on you right now, and you can pay me later, but it's all true. Yeah. I mean, it's all 100% true. I mean, I'm telling you, I've hung out with your wife at 4:00 in the morning talking about UFOs and everything else. If there was something under the hood, I would know. And I'm just telling you, man, dude, you're cool as it gets, man. And I also want to say this, a couple of people that are on SpaceTogether's platform and going through our training and stuff, they come from the CIM network. And I'm just going to tell you right now, there is a difference. You know what I mean? Like, we have all these different partners and I love everybody, and there's definitely cool, unique expressions, but there's not really anything like going to a CIM conference and you just feel like it's like, hey, so this is the big family reunion. We're going to have some kind of, cool music going on and somebody that's going to give us a cool word, but nobody is here for that. You know what I mean? Like no one is there for the actual teaching or anything. It's just to connect with the culture and the community that you've built. So I just want to say, man, really, really cool stuff. Love working with you guys. And so with all that said, all the praise for the bishop and everything else, man, I just kind of want to jump in a little bit and shift gears a little over to SpaceTogether.
And let me just say, all right, I mean, a big ditto back. I mean, I think one of the reasons we connected from the get-go is because what you just described to me is also who you are. And birds of a feather flock together. I mean, I mean, there's a huge thing with a similar DNA. And so, I mean, you and Catherine and them little munchkins are some of our favorite people also. And
hyenas.
We love you guys big time.
Yeah. And we totally know that, 100% know that. So, man, you have traveled around not just to a lot of these really big churches, but you've also traveled around to a ton of these smaller, communities. And one of the things that I've always taken from when you said that is when you would go to these, like I'm in Athens, Texas right now, in a town of like, I think maybe 5,000 people or something like that. And I'm sitting in this place. And I remember telling you that we were moving to this little, lake in Texas with nobody around it. And you were like, oh, I've preached there for 25 years. I know all these people and all these tiny little churches. And the thing is, man, is like, it's hard sometimes when you're a pastor of a really small church to not feel like you're not having impact and to feel like, that you could be a failure because you've never grown to the big numbers or, had this, what we would call just this massive impact or whatever. And you've talked about how you've seen some of the most faithful people in the world serving these small churches all everywhere. Can you talk just a little bit about that and kind of what that's been like to go in and try to encourage some of these folks that are just, in smaller towns and smaller areas?
Yeah. I think, conferences are wonderful, but I think sometimes what big conferences do is normally the people that are putting on the platform are from bigger cities, bigger communities. They built quote unquote big churches and ministries. They're quote unquote successful. And so, people from a small town, that they might be in a town of 5,000 people and they've got a church of 200 or 300. They're thinking, man, I mean, I'm not significant, but percentage wise, their church is bigger than other guys.
Yeah,
because he's in a city of 1 million. Yeah. And he's got 3,000 people, but I mean, they're actually doing a better job percentage wise. But I think what happens is people go to conferences like that and they get encouraged, but they get discouraged at the same time, because they're thinking, man, I don't know if I could ever lead like that. And then the other side of it is it depends on someone's fivefold ministry gift. Like they might be hearing a guy that's leading a massive ministry that's like an evangelist. And so he's like, man, we're getting, 20,000 people a year saved. It's like, well, of course you are. I mean, that's what you're passionate about. I mean, of course, nobody's growing, nobody's learning because, if you got any teachers in the house or pastors to take care of them, you probably got a lot of people running through. But then, or there'll be someone that'll be maybe real prophetic and they're a real kind of strong type leader. And then you'll have a pastor in a small community and he say, man, I can't lead like that. That's not my personality. And then they leave discouraged sometimes more than encourage, kind of comparing themselves rather than realizing, listen, I love the picture in the Old Testament where, you've got you've got Moses, and Moses has got 3 million people. I mean, out camping and nobody wants to go camping. I mean, it's, they're out in the wilderness and he's sitting from morning till night. I mean, literally sunrise till sunset, and he's judging. All right. I mean, he's like the only judge in the place. And think about that. If it was 3 million people, if he was just meeting with 1% of people a day, I mean, it would be insane. Well, his father-in-law Jethro shows up and he's like, "You're crazy," I mean, morning till night, all you're doing is just problem solving. And he said, you need to set up, you need to establish, you need to put some over thousands, some over hundreds, some over 50s, and some over tens. And then you lead it, which for me, that's a picture of what Jesus called the fivefold ministry. And that each one has different measures, metrons. There's nothing more frustrating when you're trying to have a measure of thousands, but your measure is 50s, and so you're trying to attain to be something you're never going to be because it's not even your measure. It's not even the grace that's on your life. And so, be the best, let those be the most incredible 50s people on the planet, but then nothing worse than when you have a grace or a measure for thousands and you're stuck with tens and there's more in you, you know what I mean? And so I think it's people not only discovering what their gift is, but also their metron, their measure of authority. I mean, not everybody's supposed to be over thousands or hundreds. Some are supposed to be just over tens, or some over 50s. And that's okay. One is not better than the other. It's all of us doing our part in the kingdom. And for one reason or another, God sees what we can handle and gives us those different measures of leadership. And I think if most Bible schools and most training places, even most denominations and networks, when they're helping people, kind of find who they are and what they fit, I think that's one of the number one things they could do is really encourage them to not only know and discover what their gift is, but then really pray and ask the Holy Spirit what their measure is. And that doesn't mean that your measure can't grow, and it doesn't mean you can't be a part of something bigger, because you might have a great measure. I mean, my dad's measure was 50s. He was a pastor teacher, and my dad would get 200 to 300 people, and he was the happiest person on the planet, as long as they were growing and increasing. But, you could sit and put my dad, and you could put a leadership podcast in his ear 24/7. He's not going to have more than 200 or 300 people. I mean, it's just, no matter how much you try, but he could have on his team people that have other measures. So it's not that he couldn't be a part of something larger than 200 to 350s, but he would have to allow people with other measures to function in their gifts and their grace. Then corporately, you could do something bigger than just what your measure is. But again, it's my dad is a teacher. I mean, him in a small group setting on Wednesday nights with like 60, 70 people, which is tens. He's the happiest camper in the world. Just let him impart to that group of people. And of course, Jesus. I mean, Jesus would get big crowds and he'd run them all off. He wasn't impressed by crowds because he was busy producing sons and daughters. And he's like, that's great, but let me get back to my work, which is these 12. And he'd heal somebody and he'd say, don't tell nobody. I used to think that was like reverse psychology, until you tell somebody not to, then they do the opposite thing. But it was really because healing people wasn't his work. He was moved with compassion while he was doing his work, and his work, according to John 17:4, is, Father, the work you gave me to do, I've now completed it. And all he talks about is the 12. And so his work on the earth as Jesus, the Son of Man, was to reproduce himself in 12 individuals. And, if Jesus were on the planet today, he probably wouldn't be considered very successful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because, he had a group of 70 that ran around with him, 12 that he really poured his life into, and, didn't have a mega church, didn't have a mega ministry, and really put his focus on that. And so I think people need to, really discover their gifting and their measure, and then be okay with who God made them to be. Yeah, absolutely,
man. I remember whenever of course you were a part of this whole thing whenever, Dan, my mentor, kicked us out and told us we had 3 months to find a building.
Right, yeah.
I mean, you got to hear the legitimate panic in my voice of like, man, I don't know what we're going to do. Where are we going to go? What are we going to do?
Absolutely.
We've got this church of, 150, 200 freaking idiots that are going, just wild hyenas, you know what I mean? I mean, what it was like to be there. And so it was nuts, man. It was an absolutely crazy thing. And whenever we got into the building and went through that whole crazy process, and then we started renting it out, it was 100% the impact that we were having in our community that led us to say, let's start SpaceTogether. And out of all of that, the real thing was, all I was doing is I had this 3,500 square foot building that is not a very big church. I mean, like, we can all agree the auditorium it was only supposed to seat like 120, and we would pack that.
Yeah, my house with our finished basement in Michigan was 4,200 square feet.
Yeah, exactly. This is not a big building. And man, we were producing like well over $100,000 a year from just renting it out to these people, you know? And then these folks are coming up to us and they're like, man, you have no idea. We would not have been able to do this. All of these people that we're helping right now and we're serving, whether it was in business or ministry or whatever else, they were like, this would not have happened if you would not have done what you're doing. And I'd steal this Andrew Womack line in all of our training and stuff. But I talk about like, if you take an apple and you crack open that apple, you can count every single one of the seeds that are in the apple, but you can't look at a seed and tell me how many apples are in that seed. And it really just came down to, we may not have had a whole lot. Like we made, especially whenever we were first getting into that building, we certainly didn't have a lot of resources. We didn't really have much, but now all of a sudden this building for the first time was 100% in my hands. And, you know, once we got to the place where we could, you know, produce enough revenue to sustain everything, it was like, well, this is cool, but we still have all this availability in our space. And we started really measuring what we were doing and sharing our building much more for the impact than it was actually the cash involved with sharing our space. You know, and I think that was what kind of really made us say, we've got to go and try this out. We've got to go and figure out how to do this. And I tell people all the times, like, it's not so much that like, this is going to become the thing that you do. Like when a dance studio starts, you know, renting their space on SpaceTogether, they don't stop having dance studio classes, right? Like what we're trying to do is really help you just be a megaphone and an amplifier for what you're doing. So we always tell people that there's only going to be two reasons that you're sharing space. Number one, it's because you're trying to have an impact. You're trying to say that we want to reach more people with the resources that we have, or you're saying we've got to make some more money right now and we have this building, so that's how we're going to do it. But everybody finds themselves on that kind of spectrum of either impact or cash. But the thing that I guess I really wanted to highlight was that whole thing you just said about like, there's a lot of these folks that have these buildings and they're feeling like they're not really having the type of impact that that person is or this person is. And one of the people that always stood out to me is another person that you introduced me to. The guy is a multimillionaire. We won't say his name because I don't know if we should or not, but this guy pastors a church in a town of like 600 people or something crazy. I don't remember what it is out there in Duggar, but it's like, it's a tiny spot. And this dude is working at like a beef slaughterhouse or something and gets saved radically. He was like some kind of biker. All of a sudden he's pastoring and the same kind of thing hits him where he's just like, man, I've got this little community that I'm called to. Is this it? Is this all that I'm doing? And then as he started praying those prayers of like, how can I have more impact and how can I do more? All of a sudden the Lord opened up all of these doors and the impact and what he's been able to do has increased 1,000-fold just by him doing some things that were really out of the box, you know? Yeah. And so anyways, just really wanted to kind of hone in on some of that of just like, this is a way that you can really take the resources that you've been given, the calling that you've been given, the assignment that you've been given, and just hold up a microphone to it and say that, you know, our space in this community is here for this community. It's not like our secluded little tribe over here for Sundays. Like we literally are opening and kind of planting this facility into our community because it's ours, you know, and anything that is us will represent impact and care for our community. How many times along the way, or how many times in, you know, your career of traveling to all these other churches, do you feel that something like SpaceTogether could have been the answer for them both having more impact and then solving some of their financial issues?
Oh, huge. You know, I mean, I've encouraged churches for at least 20 years that they should be sharing space. You know, I mean, they're killing themselves, you know, paying for this 5,000 square foot storefront. And there's all these churches in town that, you know, and a lot of them like a little more traditional denominational, where a lot of them are older and they've got these buildings where they've got like 2 different sanctuaries, you know, and the one church meets at 9:00 and they're out of there by 10:15. And, you know, you could still do a Sunday morning, do it like at 11:00 instead. And, you know, I mean, save all those expenses, help the other church also, which to me is far more kingdom. I think we spend way too much money on buildings that stay empty all the time. And so, you know, I've encouraged, I mean, when we had our church in Michigan, we had a storefront, but we only met on Sunday night. So we had another church in there meeting on Sunday morning. And, you know, that allowed us to, you know, I mean, that took care of more than half of our rent, you know, which for me was a no brainer because, you know, I mean, I was paying for a good portion of that anyway.
You're paying the other half. Yeah.
I mean, pretty much, you know, and so, you know, I mean, that's what happens when you start something new and fresh, you know?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I've I've watched churches that have done this for years, but they didn't have, there wasn't anybody that could help them organize when it comes to leases and, setting all this up or finding people to meet in. And so, when you were first discussing with me, this business and wanting to start it, I said, man, that's a no-brainer. I was like, that's absolutely needed, especially in a lot of the church space, but I think it's also a lot in the marketplace space too, because there's a lot of businesses out there that could actually, uh, use this also. And then, of course, when COVID hit, I think that's when a lot of churches, especially, realized, you know what, man, we don't even need this building the way that we had. So, we need to figure out different ways. And the truth is this, I've told guys, I told you this, probably when we first met, that the day and hour of just living for churches on tithes and offerings, that's slowly like waning away. It's like if churches don't have multiple streams of income, and they're wise in investments and doing other things, it's just going to be very difficult to continue to do what they do, because it's just people have a different mindset from one generation to another when it comes to money. And so we've got to learn how to adjust and go with the flow still and still function.
Yeah. We've talked about this before. I remember calling you when this was going on, but we started growing like absolute crazy in 2019. So we were doubling and tripling month over month. We were growing in revenue, spaces added, lead volume, everything was just doubling and tripling. We had figured out, this is what people want to hear. This is what they kind of need. And so we were really capitalizing on all of that. And when we were doing that, we almost went completely away from working with churches. And there were a couple of reasons there. Like, number one, the church is like the actual building. It's called the church. You know what I mean? Like, we're going up to the church. It's an item, that we have. And, the building is it's this super massive, important thing. And because of that, there was a lot of other red tape that was kind of weird. Like, these buildings wouldn't even be very cool. And it would be like, well, we have to go through a 3-month discussion process of whether or not we're going to do this. And we're like, dude, we've got 50 people signing up every day. So, if you're going to do it, great. If not, then this is just kind of what it is. But the bigger thing that started happening, and I know you've heard Cheney talk about this, which is one of the funniest things on earth, but all of our support issues were coming from pastors. Like, every bad interaction, not every bad interaction, but I would say easily 60% of the bad interactions that were happening were coming from pastors being rude to the people in their communities. You know what I mean? And this is way pre-pandemic. This is pre-pandemic, right? And so we were like, you know what, look, maybe we're just too early for the church market. Let's, go and do everything else. And we had gyms and kitchens and all kinds of nonprofits and offices, signing charter schools. All these things were just signing up without even a question. Like, what are you talking about? This building is a building. You know what I mean? Like, we definitely want to make money doing it, but then the pandemic hit, and, our users couldn't even get into their buildings, much less share them with somebody. And so we knew that we were going to have to kind of hyper focus, that we were going to have to drill down on one vertical. And, we picked the church for a couple different reasons, but the main one is just that if a gym signs up on my platform, there's a massive amount of diversification of use. Like, a dance studio space can hold nearly every other fitness industry. A combat gym can do the same thing. Certainly an actual big box gym, they can hold any other type of fitness industry. They can hold them in all different times. They can be prime. And so there's a lot of diversification of use, but it's definitely industry stagnant. It's going to stay in one vertical. It's going to be somebody else in the fitness space. You're not going to have a lot of people that need to do a food truck. They're going to want to come and rent, from the dance studio. It's just not going to happen. There's not a lot of cross-pollination there. However, with our churches, 35% of them have full gymnasiums, 65% of them have commercial kitchens. They all have fully up to code childcare facilities. They all have offices. They all have one auditorium at least. And that's not to mention these folks that have entire schools and acres of land and huge parking lots and all these other types of things that we've built to be this place that we could attract the community to us. But now we're just not really using those facilities the way that they once got used, And so the thing that I say is, like, when you plant your facility into your community, it's not just as a church, but you can address all of the business and nonprofit needs in your entire community, or a huge portion of them. And then by doing that, you can then connect to all of those folks, you know what I mean? And you're talking to the leaders of these nonprofits. You're talking to the leaders of these businesses, who are then going to bring their clients, And all the people that are going to their dance studio, all the people that are running
Yep.
they're all going to come to your church and have an interaction with you. Now, it may not be during your service, but it's going to be a time where they can actually engage and interact with you. And so, I mean, I think it's just a great opportunity for us to say, hey, we're not all, we don't all suck. You know what I mean? Like, we actually are great people that would enrich your life if you came and joined us and start trying to check us out,
Yep. Absolutely.
I was talking to Mark DeMoz here recently. You don't know Mark yet, but you will. He's a great guy. He's out in Little Rock, Arkansas. He's an author, speaker. He leads the Mosaics, and it's a multicultural church movement that he's been a part of. Really cool stuff that they're doing. Has a great work out in Arkansas and Little Rock. He also wrote this book called The Coming Change or The Coming Revolution in Church Economics. And just so really, really love this guy. And I got to kind of sit down and talk with him recently. And I haven't got to talk to you about this yet. So this will be somewhat fresh. But he was getting up and he was giving a presentation about the He Gets Us campaign. That's all over. I was just in Vegas. It's all over the strip. I mean, it was the Super Bowl commercials. If you guys don't know what we're talking about, just look up the He Gets Us commercials or campaign. And it's $1 billion that he's spending, on, or that they are spending on this ad campaign. And Mark gave a really, really unique perspective, I thought. And he talked about how, when you watch this, you're seeing, all these people in different, very human moments where they're sick or they're poor or they're hungry, all these different kinds of scenarios. And they're really, rather than trying to appeal to the deity of Christ, they're trying to appeal to his humanity. And they're saying that, he was also human. So rather than, come to church and see this expression of deity, it's come to church and see this expression of deity with humanity and come and connect, which is this really beautiful thing. It's really, really cool. But he goes, let me stop you there, though. Let me stop you right there. The Methodist movement about 10 years ago had the same thing that was called like open doors, open minds, open hearts. And they spent $65 million or $80 million on this full scale ad campaign. And it was all about, if you come to a Methodist church, we have open minds, we have open hearts, and we have open doors. And Mark was making the case that initiative failed miserably, not because the ads weren't great, not because the content wasn't good, but because when they showed up to a Methodist church, they did have open doors, but that was it.
Right. Right.
That was it. It was, you've got to come and be just like us, or you've got to convert to our way of thinking, or never mind, And one of the things that we've just been talking to a lot of people is that there's been this kind of, people can have a certain way. It's kind of like you talk about how you say, I troubleshoot for nonprofits. You know what I mean? Rather than saying I'm a preacher. And it's because it shuts people down. It turns people off. And I think a lot of times we kind of preach that in a way where it's, well, they don't understand our holiness. They don't understand the conviction that we have, and that convicts them of the sin. But one thing that you've said to me a million times, and I'd love for you to expound on some of this, is that you don't find that in the Gospels ever. In an interaction with Jesus and a sinner, they were so thankful.
Yep.
And actually, in their shame, the woman caught in the act of adultery, in their shame, trying to get away, he would pursue them.
Yep.
You're totally welcome. The woman at the well, and you have all of these different experiences where Jesus himself went into the community, not as this, you're totally wrong, you're totally everything. It was just, there's something here for you that I'm going to give you that will stay with you forever. And I'd love for you to expound a little bit on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Jesus was a friend of sinners, not ex-sinners.
Yeah.
Which literally means that not everybody that got around Jesus changed. Some stayed the same, and he was still their friend. And I think for some reason in the church world, and I've taught this for years. What Pharisees did and what religion does is religion says, believe what we believe, then change, then we'll accept you. And Jesus shows up and he completely flips the script, and it's the opposite. He sees Zacchaeus up in a tree, and he doesn't say believe and change. He just says, I accept you. Zacchaeus, I must come to your house. I always tell people Jesus wasn't a street preacher. He didn't look at Zacchaeus and say, you filthy, rotten little heathen. You're ripping people off. You need to repent of your sins and turn from all your wicked ways and come down here and confess your sin right now. And then I'll love you. Instead, he just says, I must come to your home. And the scripture says that when Zacchaeus hears that he's accepted, comes down from the tree, and then he says, if I've stolen from anybody, I'm going to restore it. If I've defrauded anybody, I'm going to restore it fourfold. And then Jesus says, wow, salvation has come to his house. Jesus never preached salvation to him, never took him down the Romans road, never told him to pray a prayer. All he did was show him acceptance. And the thing I've said for years is that unbelievers, sinners, whatever language we want to use, pagans, if you may, always felt safe in Jesus's presence. The only people that didn't feel safe in Jesus's presence were the religious. And that lets me know that anytime, and I use this story, I mean, you've heard me tell this story several times. When I was in my early 30s, the town that we lived in up till 3 years ago was the town I was raised in from the time I was 10. And so I have a lot of family there. Well, I have two of my cousins that are girls that are older than me. And I remember we had a family get together, and my mom was telling me the next day, she said, your two cousins came up to me after the get together, after you left. And they said, well, Jaime makes us feel uncomfortable. And so my mom said, well, why? They said, well, we feel like he sees right through us. I remember when my mom told me that when I was like 31, 32 years old, I was so proud of that. I was like, that's right. It's the man of God is in their midst, the prophet of God. They're under conviction in my holy presence. And it took me, which is ridiculous now to think about.
It's so ridiculous here.
Yeah, I know. It's just, but it took me
so many things could be said.
Hello. I mean, it took me a few years, but I remember, I was sitting in my office and the Holy Spirit reminded me of that one day. And he said, I want you to go through the Gospels and try to find one time where an unbeliever ever felt like that in Jesus's presence. And the truth is, I couldn't find it, and what hit me is my cousins weren't under conviction in my presence. The truth is, they were under condemnation. What they were sensing from me was shame because they'd be, holding a beer or they'd be, drinking something, or they were acting a certain way. And it wasn't conviction. It was condemnation they were sensing from me because they didn't feel safe in my presence. And that's when, man, God really began to deal with me about that and say, nobody. I mean, I literally was raised in church hearing, like, if a sinner, like, is comfortable with you, there's sin in your life. Yeah. Like literally, sinners should be around Christians and just be miserable in their sin. And I'm like, well, that's just completely ridiculous. They should feel safe with us. And I think that's got to begin to shift in the church. I mean, that's where, the new covenant was so different than the laws and the religiosity of the old covenant. It wasn't believe what we believe, then change, then we'll accept you. It's we accept you, period. Then people will begin to believe and then they'll change. Yeah. And I had to realize a long time ago, I'm not a good Holy Spirit. I'm just not. It's not my job to be the Holy Spirit. It's my job to just radically love people where they are. And it's his job to change them. I mean, I can't change them. I can't even change myself most of the time. I mean, I need the Holy Spirit also. And I think if churches and ministries, businesses, I mean, that's the crazy thing is with businesses, I mean, they don't have that mindset. It's like, if you're going to come around, if you want to do business in our business, man, we don't care what you're into, I mean, unless you got some, crazy cake bakers who won't sell a cake to a homosexual wedding because they're, religious. I remember, man, the Christian world was just roaring about that. Oh, they're standing for righteousness. But I remember going on social media and I said, what blows me away is we're celebrating that the Christian business wouldn't bake a cake for a gay wedding. But yet, how many cakes did they sell to pedophiles who took those cakes to lure kids into their house to molest them? But as long as we don't know about it, as long as we don't know about your sin and it's hidden, we're good with you. I mean, it's if people would think some of this stuff through, it's just so silly many times, and that's where, I've always encouraged people. I said, man, we only have one obligation to people, and that's to love them.
Yeah.
Period. The only commandment Jesus ever gave, love one another as I've loved you. And he said, that's the only litmus test to the world that you're mine. It's not what you wear and don't wear. It's not what you say. It's not your language. It's not how holy you are, not how much you go to church, not how much you give money at the church, not how much you pray for people or pray over your meal out loud in a restaurant. How they'll know that you're true followers of Jesus is that you radically love humans.
Yeah. Man, me and you've talked about this so many times, and it's definitely something that stuck with me a lot. But just the fact that your culture is going to trump your vision, and you can have a mission statement, you can put it up and say, this is who we are as a group, this is who we are as a community, this is what we're focused on. But if you walk in and none of that is happening and it's not prevalent anywhere, it's like, well, your culture will trump your vision. And just going right along with what we've been talking about, my biggest dream for this at Space Together, obviously, number one, I want to make sure that there's nobody else like me, that was just somebody that was genuinely working my tail off to try to make things happen for my community, genuinely did not care about anything other than having a really safe place for all those crazy people that were coming to my church. And that was the only thing that was on my mind. That's all I was really trying to figure out. And because I didn't have traditional backing, or because I didn't have a family member that I could, go and get a cosigner for or whatever, I couldn't find a building to keep doing what I needed to do. So number one, without question, so that there's no other person like me that can't get started in what they were wanting to do because they don't have the proper backing or access or whatever else. Like, that's mission number one at Space Together. Everybody can do what they need to do by partnering with cool people in their community. But in the background, another thing that is just such a hope and a prayer for me is I have met some of the coolest people in the world that are pastors, that are church people, some of the funniest people I've ever met, some of the funniest encounters I've ever had in my life have been at some sort of, it's 10 o'clock after some sort of conference or church service, and people are just sitting around talking, and some random person is the funniest person you've ever met in your life. And all these other guys that you meet that are like those small town pastors that are really genuinely doing everything they can do for their community, and all those other things that, that 100% we would have the opportunity to allow all of the folks that are the Pharisees, or the people that are genuinely, they're disinterested in helping their community, they're disinterested in anything other than kind of staying in their bubble. I hope that they somewhat get exposed. I hope that there's like this thing of like, man, that person right there is just, that group is just not fun to be around. I didn't feel welcome when I was there. I didn't feel like this was something that I could have. And then on the flip side, I pray that this whole experiment, this whole platform, this whole business can turn some of these awesome, tremendous pastors in all the cities and all the communities around our country that have said, we want to be 100% the pillar of support in this community, and they can go prove it.
Come on.
They can put their money where their mouth is. And then at the end of it, the people that share with them will go, this was fantastic. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to go and do or sustain what I always wanted to do. And I feel like Space Together just enables that. It just gives you the opportunity to genuinely, without somebody, these people are not a part of your church. They're not one of your partners. They don't know you. They don't have to like you, quote unquote, because you're the pastor. They could just see you as another man that they're entering into another woman that they're entering into a partnership with, and let that be as real as it could possibly be, and honest. And so again, man, I really hope that's one of my true hopes. And I think you had a part to play in that, just in it being a place where pastors can kind of prove their authenticity. And then of course other people can have the access that they need.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think what you're doing is so needed right now. I mean, I'm grateful, that from the jumping off point, we were able to be there and be a part of it. And I'm very grateful. I know the people that are connected to us, that use this platform. I mean, love it. And, I know that will continue. And man, I'm just super proud of you, man. And everything you guys are doing, and it's crazy needed right now in this world we're living in this system. And nobody knows financially what's going to happen over the next few months, the next few years, and being able to know that your expenses are way down, or I know some that are sharing buildings that the initial people that actually own it have no expenses. It's literally covered all their expenses. So, they can literally meet for nothing, which is huge. I mean, when you've got that stress, off of your back, then you can actually focus on ministry. And I think you can do it more authentic because there's still no agenda of nickels and noses. It's like, 100%. I need you here because I need your money. And that's just a reality in most ministries. It just is, rather than we just love you for loving you.
You've been with me before when I've said this to pastors, but I talk about how when we were doing this and our bills were paid, like we had all the money that we needed to cover everything. Catherine and I were getting paid. I mean, it was like, man, we've really turned a corner here. Things are going okay. When I would stand up in front of my church, which was already, they loved to be challenged. I mean, we didn't have a hard time preaching stuff in there, but when I would stand up and I would say that we feel like that this is something that we wanted to raise an offering for, or this is something that we wanted to give towards, or this was an effort that we wanted to be a part of in our community, everyone there knew that I did not need their money. Everyone knew, because they'd seen the tenants. They knew. We told them about it. We told everybody the journey that we were on, what percentage of the overhead was covered. They all knew. They knew that I didn't need their capital. And because I was able to just purely get up and speak from my heart, it changed so much about our culture. And I always, and you've been with me when I've said this to pastors before, but I'll look at them and I'll say, hey man, what would you say to your congregation if you didn't have to worry about numbers or cash? And every time I say it, they start smiling. They're like, oh man, dude. And then I go, so how long have you been inauthentic in front of your congregation for numbers or cash? And it's like, we all get it. Right. We all understand. Anybody that's pastored, anybody that's done any of this, you understand it. That why they're doing it, but there's certainly a more authentic way, and there's some ways that we can make that happen. So I want to say this, anybody that's in the CIM network that's listening to this, you guys already have a deal with us. So if you don't already have the information, go to info@spacetogether.com. Let us know that you're part of CIM and who you are and everything. As soon as we verify with the bishop that you're actually a part of the group, we have some crazy discounts for you guys and some things that you can do to get onboarded at SpaceTogether for $250 a year. And so you're going to have a massive discount because you're part of the network. It's certainly inexpensive. Our average license agreement is $20,000 over 14 months, and they're only going to want 8 hours a week of your building. So, we're not giving up a ton. It can certainly add something to your bottom line and help you impact your community. So you guys know all that. I mean, you'll hear a lot of that, guys, from the CIM. If you are not part of the CIM network, guys, I'm just telling you, we didn't talk about this, but Jaime is certainly a theologian. He is incredibly well studied in all sorts of different. I get annoyed when he starts talking to other church people. I'm not there. I'm not that. I've never have been that guy, but I'm not that guy. If we're out together somewhere and another pastor starts talking theology, I know for about 2 hours something else is happening. I can leave and go somewhere else, and it doesn't matter what caliber of theologian they're talking to. I've sat there with you with professors and people that have big time PhDs, and you hold right there with them. Tremendous theologian, could get up and wax long about all the different, things that you want to talk about there. But 100%, when you connect with Jaime, you're connecting with a friend. You're connecting with somebody that's going to be there for you when things are really bad. And you will not be able to find somebody that is still connected to him that would disagree with that. I can tell you, I know most of them. You cannot find somebody that wouldn't say the same thing about Jaime. And so guys, connect with Jaime. And what is the best way for them to do it? Just through the website?
Yeah, just himconnect.net. That's the easiest. And all the information is right there on the website.
And if you have a Facebook page, if you're on Facebook, go and follow Jaime. He puts out a ton of content and a bunch of different things, and he loves to have discussions on there. He'll answer your questions and talk with you the majority of the time. But I encourage you guys to have Jaime come into your churches, Zoom him into your leadership meetings. We did that all the time. I mean, we would have him Zoom in to talk to our guys. So I just encourage you guys, have Jaime come in to speak. He's truly a friend and a very authentic leader. Couldn't endorse him enough. So man, I love you. Thank you so much for sitting and taking a little time to talk about what we're doing. And I just appreciate you a ton, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Same here. Love you and believe in you guys big time. And it's been an honor.
All right, man. See you soon.
Thanks for watching this episode of Space Together. I'm sure you found it really informative, engaging, and rewarding. So join us at spacetogether.com today and begin generating revenue by impacting the community around you.